Hey guys, welcome to the secret history of living in your aquarium and on this wonderful world. I am Alexander Williamson and I am coming to you from Seattle, Washington, here in the United States of America. And basically today what I want to talk to you guys about is the state of the world and all the different conflicts and issues right now that are affecting the availability of our favorite fish in the hobby, our favorite sources of critters. We actually get most of the fish here in the United States, right here from Florida. If we zoom in a little bit, most of the imported fish in the United States for the freshwater tropical world actually come into the city of Ruskin. We've got Seagrest, 5D, and Imperial, as well as down in... I've got videos of this on my channel as well, but as well as down in Bradenton and just east of Tampa. And then there's another place called Plant City, which has a lot of Florida Aquatic Nursery and a lot of the other sources we get a lot of our aquascaping plants from here in the U.S. if they are freshly potted and or grown. So it's interesting in that they've had cruise ships and things down south in Sarasota here, Fort Myers as well, in Florida, that they had to deal with all sorts of issues with quarantines and things. That area in the Tampa Bay area was impacted pretty heavily, but for the most part, what I've heard is that they have been shipping a majority of the fish that they normally would. They're able to kind of run that facility, separate the employees from one another, and kind of keep pumping things out. However, they cannot necessarily get a lot of the fish that they want right now, and that's always the case somewhere in the world. Famously, the Congo puffer, for instance, that's one that we don't breed super readily in the hobby. Or in Brazil, we've got the leopard pleco, the leopard frog pleco, as well as the zebra pleco. Neither of those readily spawn for us on a, I guess I'd say on an industrial scale. So the price stays very high, $300 to $500 depending on your country and your state and shipping and all those sort of things. And if you have a club locally or someone is spawning them. And then there's some fish that they really just need hormonal therapies and things like that to encourage spawning, and so you're not going to get them to spawn in captivity without resorting to those means, and oftentimes it's just not cost effective. People are not going to do that for, say, a neon tetra. Now, I'm not saying that about neon tetras. In fact, they've started breeding the caridinas in Florida. Whereas down in Brazil, Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, this whole area right in here. Wait, let me get a better pointer than that mouse. You guys might not be able to see it. We'll use an aquascaping tool. So this whole area right in here of the Amazon rainforest, we get a ton of our fish from there. However, Brazil has closed off all tropical fish, ornamental tropical fish exports. And Venezuela is in a state of crisis with the government kind of clamping down, and there is a bit of instability in the fact that at one point the military kind of rose up a little bit a few years back, and you've got essentially a communist dictatorship, and then you've got some fascist factions as well as democratic protesters and just civilians that want a republic or a democracy, all kind of vying for control, while meanwhile you've also got all throughout the jungle in here, you have big problems in Colombia as well as parts of Peru, with communist rebels, Maoist rebels, or Marxist rebels. There's different factions. In Peru, it used to be called the Shining Path, and that used to prevent us from getting a hold of some of the fish we wanted and things like that. But really, it impacts these local cities, and in the heart of the rainforest here, Manaus used to be a large exporter of fish and of all sorts of different animals and plants and wonderful things that we have come to enjoy as part of our catalog in the hobby. So with them shutting those things down, it's made it a little bit harder to get a hold of some of these things. And a lot of people have imported them and maybe spawning them somewhere, but that doesn't mean that it has made commercial sense for people to do so. And because of this, a lot of times you'll see that they're not getting taken care of that way. So now the Brazil, let me rephrase that. They've put a major limit on a lot of exports with catfish and things like that. However, there are quotas and tax stamps that the locals can get in a from what I've read about, a fairly corrupt system. They're working very hard with non-government organizations like Project Piaba is a great one, where they're really trying to give the indigenous people of the rainforest of this region, which floods, they're trying to give them back the power of being able to collect these fish, bring them in, and sell them for a fair price at market. But a lot of the tours of the Amazon, things like that, when you see like Aquarium Co-op, when Corey went to the jungles, it's much more popular to enter through the Peruvian side of the jungle here, as well as some people go through Bolivia, but there's some pretty big mountains right in here, and a lot of this is really just not well explored, this area in general, and this area right here this is a huge area where we do not necessarily know what species even exist in this region specifically. This is the indigenous peoples area, which basically Brazil and Peru and part of Bolivia have agreed that there are sections here that are for the indigenous tribes that have not wanted outside contact. There's officially 126 of them. There's more like about 25 that do not trade whatsoever with outsiders. And even so, they're not immune to having things like pots and pans and t-shirts and clothing and stuff like that. Now, they're not going to have cell phones and electricity, that kind of stuff out there necessarily. But some of the tribes that are considered indigenous out there, I wanted to paint a clearer picture. And the same is true of Africa and Papua New Guinea, almost everywhere now. Even the most remote tribes, if we hop over real quick, we've made some sort of contact with. Now, there's an island off the coast of India where that's not true. In the Andaman Sea, we get shot with bows and arrows every time anybody tries to go there. People get killed. But likewise, down here in Papua New Guinea, specifically in the interior, the mountainous interior in the valleys, we don't know totally what's there. The Aru Islands, where we get our pseudomagills and rainbow fish, a lot of the different little fish that we all know and love, are in the Aru Islands. And also these islands that are in the tropical water right here is the Barrier Reef area off the coast of Australia. But over in this region here, there are all sorts of little island chains, and there are actually little fish and shrimp and things that come from these regions that we don't necessarily, maybe we haven't fully explored some of these places. Now, definitely not in a biological sense. One of the most interesting places where we get a lot of things is this K-shaped island. I think it looks like the letter K, kind of, or the letter X, perhaps, or really messed up chromosomes. But Sulawesi, and there are a number of lakes on the island. And if you look here, let's see here. I can show you guys to scale. So this is 5 miles across. This pointer I have down at the legend in the corner. That gives you an idea of what 5 miles is at this scale. So I mean, there's some mountainous valleys and things and lakes that are 10 miles across and 25, 30 miles long that we have not necessarily done a complete job of investigating, and they have immense biodiversity because before the Ice Age, this whole region actually was connected like this, down this way, through here, and that's why you get the large megafauna and things like that. This is a very shallow sea for the most part. There are some deep trenches and things, and the deepest trench in the world's up here, but which would be the Marianas. But I'm just kind of painting the picture of some of these hubs of biodiversity. Another incredible hub of biodiversity would be Malaysia, Thailand, Myanmar, Burma, and this region in here, Southeast China. India is another hot spot. And then the other huge biodiversity rich area, and it's kind of interesting that all these areas have these tribal and ethnic groups that are considered indigenous or pre-Western contact, pre-colonization, or they avoided colonization and have special status, or in some cases they don't, and that has caused the conflict itself. But this area in the Democratic Republic of Congo is also, there are a ton of amazing fish that we get from there. Just a myriad of killifish and lovely fish come from. Basically, you can see here the green. That tells you where the rainforest is, and the equator's right here. So you get into countries like Burkina Faso, Guinea, Nigeria, and the Nigerian Delta here, and there's just this large series of rivers that run all through here. And for the scale, this is 500 miles as the crow flies. This my pointer is 500 miles. So that should tell you, I mean, there is a lot of land, a lot of water to be explored. In fact, the lakes that we know cichlids from, you've got, Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya sharing borders, as well as Democratic Republic of Congo. And here is, just so you get a bearing, we've got your Lake Tanganyika, which is the long one. And then you've got Lake Victoria, which is, by volume, I believe it's still considered the biggest lake in the world. The tip of my pointer is 100 miles right now at the level we're zoomed in. So 200 miles across, 200, almost, 200, 230 miles across this lake. It's a giant body of water. Moving down, you can see Malawi. These are the Malawi cichlids. And then you've also got a few other lakes in here, Lake Rukua, and then you've got some that you might not have heard of, but they share in the same river drainage basins. And one major thing is that they have dammed up these regions for hydroelectric power, but also they've introduced the Nile perch in the 1960s as a food source when people were starving to death frequently, and that has really changed the ecology of some of these lakes. Now, this here is like a flooded swampland, like a river delta here, and with the season, depending on the season, you'll get anything from just watering holes that are barely connected, awesome for killifish and mudfish, catfish, fish that basically can bury themselves in the mud or in little areas and then come back out, come to life, lay eggs, and regenerate with that. Now, likewise, there are just an abundance of awesome fish in these regions here, and we're at the 100-mile scale still. So you can see in Nigeria, some of these areas. If we look at rivers, you're getting rivers that are over 1,000 miles long, reaching into the interior, running through national forests, and we have a lot of interesting diversity of all life, including humans. Here we have people from the pygmy here to the Maasai over here to up in here we've got desert Arab traders and Egyptians, and even people with Greek ancestry, Roman and Greek ancestry up here from back in the days of Carthage, Spanish and Portuguese through here. And if you get over here into Sierra Leone, Liberia, this is where clown killies come from, actually. It's from Monrovia, Liberia. And they are found right here by the coast, just outside of the city. So it's interesting where we get some of these fish. Those ones can be bred in captivity, luckily. But there are a host of killifish for every killifish or fish in general that you have probably heard of. There's another dozen that you probably haven't heard of or seen, even if you're really into fish. And so I just kind of wanted to go over this overview of some of the conflicts, some of the areas where we really draw a lot of species out of, and I wanted to kind of do this first episode as an installment of just giving this overview of the state of things, and then we'll get into various regions in the episodes to follow. So if we look at this map here, this is the large global conflicts according to the UN and the criminal court, World Criminal Court in the Hague, and basically anywhere where you see a red dot is a risk of a major war, and the conflict is very unstable, getting worse. If you see an orange color here, these are the reds here, and then it's kind of hard to tell, but the orange are here, orange, and then I'll just point out the reds, red, 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 red. And any of those regions are areas where it's very difficult to get in. And so if we just kind of go over this really quickly, basically here you've got North Korea. You don't need to worry too much about North Korea, but what happens is this whole South Korean, the North China Sea and South Korean Peninsula here, South and North Korean Peninsula, I should say, Japan, this area, all these players are not getting along. Everyone from the Philippines to the U.S., they're claiming interests. There's some islands that are in contention. It's not that important that you know any of this stuff for fish, because it doesn't come into play other than in Hong Kong, which is one major exporter of fish, as well as Singapore, which is going to be down here, and Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, all these regions in here export a ton of fish, and that's where we get a lot of them. That's where they farm them. That's where the temperature is correct to have those fish living outdoors, to feed them less expensively. Inexpensively, you can feed them. They've got heat, and then there's a water source. These areas have irrigation from centuries of rice farming and things like that, as well as the monsoon season. And so between monsoon seasons and droughts and all sorts of issues, desertification going on here, a lot of the little oases and rivers are being actually overrun by sand dunes in the Sahara right now. And that's a process that's gone on forever. You can argue whether you think it's getting worse or not from climate change. Same with up here in the Gobi Desert, and in America, for instance. But desertification is a thing that happens. It waxes and wanes over time, but it's taking out a lot of interesting isolated species that maybe we won't see in the future because they take so long to evolve that right now we're just limiting where these species can evolve so heavily. Same within Mexico, you got narcotic cartels fighting over things, and down in the Yucatan and Central America, you've got, even though they don't show it, you've got major instability in Honduras and Nicaragua, as well as Haiti, Trinidad, Tobago. It's varying levels depending on the year, but usually Haiti, and which is an island, there's not a ton of fish there, but there are quite a few fish. Central American cichlids, earth eaters, things like that are found in this Central American, all the way into Texas, where we get some cichlids in this part of our country too, firemouth and Texas cichlid, things like that. And here we have all the way back to the Aztecs. They're called cenotes. They're caves, and they're full with a lot of interesting rare, creatures like the axolotl and other aquatic life. The same is true of areas in Turkey and the Balkans. There's actually Greece right now. There's a fairly good article linked if you want to take a look on Seriously Fish about saving the Corfu killifish. It's a nice looking, kind of looks like a erythromicron killifish, but basically talking about that. Now, another major area, which we didn't even know about the fish in this area because of how closed off this area had been for so long, and that is Myanmar. And the Rohingyas are a Muslim minority group, about 1 million of them, maybe 2 million, we don't know for sure, but they've been moving into Bangladesh. They've been there since the 15th century, so over 500 years, and Myanmar is a predominantly Buddhist country, and they're saying, get out. There were attacks, tit for tat, kind of. It's hard to say whose fault it is. It's one of those kind of Israeli and Palestinian type situations where it gets very heated and people take sides. But at the end of the day, what we see is that some of the rivers that have fish that we really are fascinated by, that we love, if we take a look here, are literally being flooded with dead bodies of humans and women and children that have been raped and killed by organized government forces. The Naf River is a section of where this is happening, and it's a sad tragedy. So in here, this whole area, there's the people known as the Rohingyas, which are essentially a nomadic or gypsy people according to the oral tradition at large of the nation states in the region. However, these people say that they've lived right in here 600 years, and that's no longer a refugee camp. Like, in that regard, America's a refugee camp. So they've basically been crossing back into Bangladesh. 700,000 last year moved, and by some accounts up to 100,000 perished, either starving to death or being killed. I don't want to confirm that number because there's a lot of politicization of it. However, Myanmar has been a closed military junta, or junta, which means run by a small group of military elite in sort of a dictatorship. It's like a republic of dictators, an oligarchy of dictators, and they have some of the coolest fish. As you know, some of the nano fish are just wonderful there. In Lake Inle, we've got some really cool endemic fish. In the Irrawaddy River over here, and right in here, we've got all sorts of fish from celestial pearl danios, orange rasboras, the orange rummy nose rasboras, as well as you've got licorice gouramis and all sorts of other fish moving into Laos and as well as Thailand, these drainages from the rivers and the rainforest. This is very, very thick jungle. Up here, you've got forces backed by China that want to sway things towards military communist rule, or at least a Chinese sphere of influence rule, especially up in here. And then moving into the Shan region, which loosely is this region all throughout here. You've got all sorts of heroin being grown, poppies, and then heroin being refined in Thailand. And so people, including researchers, have been murdered for entering the region. So it's been fraught, and since 2006 to 2011 were the safest times to go in, safest in the last 60 or 70 years, basically. Well, since the 1950s. It would, by the early 1960s, the various British colonial powers had kind of begun to leave, and there was a vacuum post World War II, just like happened in all of the former colonies. In Micronesia, the same is true. There's a lot of interesting shrimp and other things just, way out in the middle of some of these islands and things. There aren't many species, but some of the ones that are there are very interesting. Even in the middle of the most remote city in the world, as some say, Hawaii and Honolulu, you've got things like the ula apa, I think is how you say it, shrimp, which live in lava tubes from the volcanoes. So it's very interesting, and it's a similar story to Sudan and South Sudan, to the Congo. There, like I said, the diversity of people is so diverse that in this region right in here, from Nigeria to Kenya and then the Congo, this area for the human species has more genetic diversity than the rest of the globe combined. So someone from Russia, for instance, and someone from Bolivia, indigenously, have more in common than oftentimes people who live right next to each other in Africa, but they've followed their tribal alliances for 100,000 years. Whereas humans left Africa, we think, something like 20 to 60,000 years ago, mostly. And then also another early wave either left by boat or by walking this way and made it all the way to Australia very early on. Maybe as early as 60,000 years, we don't know. But none of that is important to the fish necessarily. I'm just laying out some of these regions that are just hot biological regions of fish, and where we're having some major conflict problems. Like I said, like in Venezuela, same thing with the people selling narcotics in Colombia. You've got cocaine. Same with Bolivia, Peru, parts of Brazil. You've got a lot of cocaine being sold, mostly to America, and also now to Nigeria, and then into Spain and Italy. It crosses from Nigeria usually to Morocco or Algeria or Tunisia, and then they come across here. Libya, since its power kind of became, well, Gaddafi was killed and then people kind of took over, but a lot of these weapons that Gaddafi's army had leaked over, and now this region here is run by Al-Qaeda as well as Boko Haram, which is a Muslim terrorist group going around and killing people. Now, there's also, by that same token, in this Central African Republic and the DRC, we've got the Lord's Resistance Army, is one you might remember, the Coney 2012 or whatever it was, campaign to stop that warlord. Well, there's a whole bunch of warlords with all different sorts of agendas all throughout this region, and it's still a mess. South Sudan's the newest country in the world, and all these things are adding up to supply chains that used to be kind of overseen by post-colonial powers. So, for instance, Somalia was half British, half Italian. Ethiopia and Eritrea, Djibouti, right in here, had Italian influence, some German influence also, and some English. But they were able to, a lot of generations of people, and same with, like, for instance, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Zambia, these, and Kenya, these all English-speaking people really ran a lot of the government for a long time. The same being true of South Africa as well, with Dutch, and then the fusion of Dutch and English being Afrikaans. But there are also a lot of Indians from the subcontinent of India that live there as well, and a lot of Arabs from the Arab Peninsula here, the Arabian Peninsula. Now, another major conflict going on doesn't involve biodiversity of fish quite as much, but there are some interesting little desert killifish and things like that. Would be in Yemen. They're fighting Saudi Arabia and Oman as well. There have been ongoing battles, and some people would argue a genocide of a group of people. But I don't want to get into any of that specifically right now. So I hope this sets the stage for kind of some of the things going on. Of course, you know what's going on in Afghanistan and Pakistan. You've got the Al-Qaeda hideouts. They're kind of on the run. Same with what happened in Syria. Same kind of deal. But, I mean, we have some interesting things like Babalti shrimp and things like that also being found here in the Sinai Peninsula. Israel's position now, they've got a defense program called Iron Dome that's protecting them from the rocket attacks from both Gaza, Palestine, and farther in on the Sinai now, too. They're being attacked from there. But arguably, they have these massive refugee camps known as the West Bank and Gaza, which are where the Palestinian people live, predominantly Muslim, whereas Jewish and Christian people live here. And so this Iron Dome program backed by the U.S., it stops all incoming terrorist bombings that are sent by either drone or rocket or missile from these regions. And now it's stabilized things to the point where the attacks are very rare. It's much safer than the U.S. even. Deaths that you would ever get from violence like that. So they've started farming goldfish, and they've always been known as kind of a resourceful country for doing banking or computer programming or whatever. They find a niche that needs to be filled, and they fit it and fill it. And, a lot of island nations are like that as well. Japan, another huge, all the ADA, Aquascape, Aqua Design, Amano stuff, all out of there. Rice fish, koi, goldfish, a lot goes on there. A ton of innovation goes on in Taiwan. A lot of our shrimps, the crystals and the tiger bees, the Taiwan bees, all those kinds of things are being predominantly bred in factory settings, factory farming, as well as these large corporations that really have a lot of tanks and spend good money on it in some cases, and then less organized down here in Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, and finally Philippines and Indonesia. Lots of outdoor farming. Arowanas are also being farmed heavily. Can't have those in the U.S., but in Canada, people are importing them. But the big thing to say on top of all of these difficulties that we've mentioned here and given you a rundown of things, by the way, Singapore is number 2 on the biggest exporter, sometimes number 3 annually, of fish, and it is a city-state. It is a city that is, right now the map is at 20 miles across for this. So it's not, it's maybe 40 miles across all of Singapore's territory. You've probably heard of Singapore. And on this on the Malaysian peninsula here, Malay Peninsula, holds great sway, and same with Hong Kong. So if we zoom in on Hong Kong, they have a ton of innovation going on with how they spawn, breed, and selectively care for fish. And then these fish that are of higher value, guppies and koi and all sorts of different things, they then get sent down to the farther Southeast Asian nations farther south, and then that's where they're spawned, they're bred. If they need to be induced by hormones and things, that often will go on as well, and then they're exported out. Now, the other problem we're seeing is with, obviously, the illness, the pandemic. What we're going to do and how it's going to end is not yet been figured out whatsoever, as far as I'm concerned. We still have other conflicts too that play roles, such as instability in Turkey with terrorism and the Syrian conflict, and then it could erupt any day in the Balkans between the Muslim and Christian, or at least Eastern Orthodox Catholic people not getting along, as well as Serbia and the Croatia. Just an interesting dynamic of these are definitely considered European, more Western cities and nations, and yet there's some instability there. I mean, if the economy tanked majorly, I think we could actually feel some of those repercussions. Now, this whole peninsula here has been taken over. The Crimea has been taken over by Russia, and so Russia, if you see Russia, they have this swath of land that goes to the Black Sea here. This area, Donetsk, I believe it's called, has been taken over by Russian paramilitary. You could say they're Russian soldiers who moved in, or you could say that they are local people with an ethnically Russian identity. Long story short, these things going on affect trade, and Turkey, as well as the Czech Republic, right here, they're known, as well as Hungary, Green Aqua's there in Budapest, I believe. You've got some of, and Romania as well. You've got some really incredible aquascaping going on and things like that, and yet there are some economic and socio-political factors that could teeter and totter and cut off supply chains very swiftly. And then there's a lot of also fish that we just haven't seen. A lot of the former Soviet states, such as all these ones in here, the Stans and Mongolia, and even in China and Japan, we haven't seen. For instance, there's 456 different species of rice fish, or not species, but types, that just incredible different diversity, but we never see them. I guess they just don't think it's as big of a market here as it is in Japan, as it's a cultural tradition there. And, the same is true for North America. Whoops, that is not North America. North America has an enormous amount of fish, including nanofish and, sunfish, pygmy sunfish going on in the Carolinas and the Gulf Coast. So basically here, up into here. And we're seeing fish collected by hobbyists and things, as well as, just throughout the Midwest and Appalachia, people are collecting more things like gars, and specifically they're working on it in Florida and Texas and Georgia. People in their outdoor backyard pools and things like that, as well as the 160 remaining family-owned fish farms in the Tampa Bay area, basically from Spring Hill to Sarasota, Sarasota being here, and then Lakeland. This area is where about 80% of all of our imported fish come in from, And Texas has another import source, New York as well, San Francisco a little bit, but LA's the number 2 big spot, and then Vancouver, BC from a lot of the Asian things, and Seattle a little bit, I suppose. But the wet spot tropical fish in Portland is another great spot that really brings in a ton of fish. You can find them on Aquabid. So that is the world stage. Those are a bunch of the things going on that could explode at any moment. And with everyone locked down anyways, trade is all messed up, and the amount of boats going from place to place is reduced. The amount of planes is extremely reduced, and that's usually how you're going to want to send a higher end fish that's breeding stock that you're going to want to spawn. So I think we'll continue to see higher prices and things like that going on. If you've stuck around this far and you are now somewhat caught up on some of the issues, and we haven't even gotten into things like the burning of the forests in Indonesia, or in Africa, the brush fires, or Madagascar's fires being set to clear farmland, as well as palm oil plantations in Southeast Asia and South America, logging, illegal gold mining, all sorts of things going on that impact the environment of these little fish. In the U.S. here, things like the devil's hole pupfish, losing funding for taking care of some of these projects of these highly endangered species, just because all of our economies are going to be hurting, and that will be true around the world. So I just want to set the stage here, and this is be the first and hopefully fairly thorough introduction to what's going on around the world and how those things kind of tie into the fish trade itself. If you made it this far, please like and or subscribe. I would hope that I earned it. If I didn't, I don't know what you're doing with your time. It's very crazy of you. But I hope you guys all have a wonderful day. We'll come back, we'll take a look at each area and list out the species. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down below. As well as join us on Facebook. Check us out on Patreon if you want to support more historic, political, sociological links to the secrets of your aquarium. You can do that as well. It should be linked down below, as well as some discounts and coupon codes for products that I like, and fish that frankly I like, from Aquatic Arts, shrimp as well, and plants, all sorts of goodies. So take a look at all that. And if you haven't supported the channel just by throwing in a couple bucks, but you'd like to, I highly recommend doing the Patreon route, just because they take a less of a cut from it and give more to the creator, but also then I can communicate with y'all on another platform altogether, and kind of we can sort out more things. But it gives you perks for entries into drawings, gives you an extra 100 entries into the $100 giveaway we do a month for gift cards from Aquatic Arts, basically. So yeah. All right, guys, well, take care of your critters, take care of the people around you, and of course take care of yourself, or you can't do those other things. And I think if half of us did half that stuff, our world would be twice as good. So let's leave it there, and let me know what you think. What did I miss? What did I get right? And what do you know that I don't know? Because I'm sure it's a lot about some of the stumbling blocks, or some of the success stories, like Obama is another group, not Obama. Obama is a native Brazilian resource management group. It turned out that there was some corruption and things, but long story short, there's all these groups getting together around the world now, and the internet has connected us in ways that never thought possible. But unfortunately, it's done so through trade and through commerce, and because of that, a lot of these indigenous groups in some of these remote areas with extreme diversity that we may never know about if it weren't for those locals, the teeny little half-inch fish and amazing behaviors they have, or even medicinal properties, things like that. We really need to look at humanity, the environment, and the ecology, or the fish, the plants, and all of it as one picture. All right, guys, thanks. I've yacked on for way too long. This is a very long video, but if you stuck with me, thank you, and feel free to like, share, and subscribe. Talk to you later. Goodbye.